I will now hand over the stage to Professor P.J. Narayanan, a veteran graphics researcher with a PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park, also founder president of ACM India, and currently the highly popular director of IIIT Hyderabad. He will chair the first keynote session. Over to you, P.J.
Thank you, Jayant. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay. So welcome ACM India. Welcome everyone to the ACM India annual event, which we started in 2010. So this would be the 12th one happening consecutively. We usually feature very eminent speakers such as Turing Award winners or equivalent who have made the field what it is today. In the online era, of course, the talks have to be online. And who better than the winners of the latest Turing Award? So ACM India contacted Dr. Edwin Catmull, who was one of the winners of computer graphics, the Turing Award last year. He said instead of giving an online talk, he would be ready to have an interview or a conversation with somebody. And ACM India gave me the privilege and honor to conduct that conversation. We had that conversation 3-4 weeks ago. It was recorded. And what you will hear now is a recorded version of a 45-minute version of it. But Dr. Catmull will join us towards the end of it. And we have about 30 minutes for live interactions. So please be ready with questions to Dr. Edwin Catmull. I will introduce Dr. Edwin Catmull briefly right now. He's a pioneer especially in computer-generated animation. He was fascinated by the whole TV and technologies associated with that when he was a child and wanted to specialize in that. He went to University of Utah for his college. There was no way to specialize in these things, so he specialized in physics. But later he came back to University of Utah for a graduate school to do a PhD. And University of Utah, if you look at the history, has played a very critical role in computer graphics. All the pioneers like Ivan Sutherland, Kuhn, everybody used to teach there. So he went and started the class on computer graphics. And as part of his research work done at Utah, he developed things like Z buffering or Z buffering or depth buffering, which is a preeminent method to do visibility calculation. Which object is in front, which object is in back, behind it, which will be occluded, etc. in computer graphics. He also invented texture mapping, which has become a very big technique subsequently and got generalized. He was also the inventor of subdivision surfaces, which is really the technology behind creating very realistic continuous surfaces in all of computer graphics today. So he had his hands on many pioneering things in computer graphics. He wanted to continue in this field, but life wasn't easy, as you would hear from him, if you want to do computer graphics. But he did manage to do that in New York Tech, later at Lucasfilm, and became Pixar, and Pixar became Walt Disney Animation Studios. He was founders of many of these things, and he played the CEO's role until quite recently. And if you know Pixar, they are the producers makers of fantastic animated movies, starting with the first one, fully animated feature film, Toy Story in 1995, to a highly emotional movie called Soul, which came out just 2 weeks ago. And if you look at Pixar movies, you will see the hero of the movie is the story itself. Technology, even though it's very high-tech, they're not at all in focus. So Ed talks to us about how he built these things, how he built tools to make computer graphics or animated content very realistic and fast, how he set high goals and achieved them. In the process, of course, Pixar has won several Academy Awards, Golden Globe Awards, and so on. Ed himself won a couple of Oscars relating to technical contributions to the field of animated movies and so on. You would see some clippets of all that through this recorded video. So the conversation I had with him was very delightful and insightful. I'm sure you would find it to be so. The conversation that you're going to see now is only 45 minutes long. The whole conversation was much longer. I'm trying to make it available later date on ACM YouTube also. With that, I request the organizers to play the video of Ed Catmull. Enjoy. Welcome, Dr. Edwin Catmull, to this conversation. I'm really glad that you agreed to this in this online event. We are able to bring people like you to the ACM India annual event, which will take place on February 13th. Congratulations on winning the Turing Award in the last year, along with Pat Hanrahan, another computer scientist, computer graphics expert from Stanford, because this is the second time computer graphics has been awarded or recognized with a Turing Award. And after Ivan Sutherland way back, it's the second time that graphics is being recognized. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, Ivan was a mentor of mine, and of course he created the program that was instrumental in setting the course of my life. So I'm honored to follow him in this. And of course, I've worked with Pat Hanrahan for many years, and he's truly a remarkable man.
Okay. So your own contribution to the field of computer graphics, there are multiple things, early 670s that you could contribute to. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you envisaged texture mapping and what was your purpose? And I've heard that Ivan Sutherland didn't like this idea when you first presented to him. So can you give some insights of that kind to this?
Well, at the time that I joined the University of Utah, it was very early days, and the equipment and the equipment for displaying was quite primitive and crude, and compute power was minuscule compared to today, of course. So there was a problem, or a set of problems that everybody could see ahead of us, which was, how do you make the pictures? How do you get greater complexity? How do you get greater speed? How do they look better? And in the early days, most of the graphics were lines, or they were polygons. They could make quadric surfaces, which was not much use, to be honest. So if you wanted some complexity, you had to approximate things with polygons. So each student was trying to advance the state of the art, how you shade it, how you make it look smooth. And when I arrived, they had made the polygons look pretty smooth, but you still had straight edges around them, and you could see artifacts. So my goal was to produce curved surfaces, or to bend the polygons. So that's where I started. So in the process of trying to bend them, I was trying all kinds of surfaces, and I invented several different kinds of surfaces, one of which later turned out to be extremely important. It's one of the reasons for the award. But all of this was trying to get curved surfaces, and finally I came up with the idea of taking a patch, which were the B-spline surfaces at the time, and successively dividing them smaller and smaller until they're around the size of a pixel. Now, at this time, we knew that we had aliasing issues and problems, which were aggravated by the lack of compute power. So I had to do something which is to subdivide and solve the problem of what was in front, what was visible, what you could see, or that is what was hidden, how you do the anti-aliasing. And the way I did it ultimately was, rather than bending the polygons, it was this subdivision technique. But the thing about the subdivision technique was that it was based upon mathematically well-defined surfaces. Well, as soon as I had a parameterized surface, at that point, I could map the surface onto something else, like an image. But anyway, it was an exciting time. And at the same time, I worked out a different way of creating surfaces, which weren't based on four-sided patches or with four edges coming together at a corner. And actually, a separate professor at the time thought that that was a bad idea. Now, interestingly enough, for one summer, we had the grandfather of computer graphics, Stephen Coons, was visiting Utah. And I showed him my new way of generating surfaces, and he thought it was very exciting. But the other professor didn't think it was right, and it wasn't part of my thesis. So I put it off until after I left, and then I restarted with Jim Clark, who was one of the founders of Silicon Graphics and Netscape. And then he and I developed it further and made a paper. And it is now the technique for generating surfaces that's used in all of special effects and computer graphics and animation and so forth, because it's a more flexible way of creating surfaces. It actually turns out to have probably been one of the more significant things that came out of my work there, even though it had nothing to do with my dissertation.
Fascinating. You have connected all the contributions that I had noted, all the most notable contributions to computer graphics, an area which is subdivision surfaces, texture mapping, and Z buffering or depth buffering, which all, to you, it was connected together to be able to do things fast and more accurately. So in those days, what was seen as the goal or objective of computer graphics? I'm sure people were not thinking about games and other entertainment of that kind. It was for engineering or designing aircrafts or the big things, the important things. What was the take on computer graphics when the large team in Utah worked in late 60s and early 70s and all?
Well, I think one of the brilliant things that came out of ARPA, and ARPA in the United States sort of fell through the cracks. So when Sputnik was launched by the Soviets, then of course there was all sorts of response and reactions, and the military was jumping in on various things to respond to an immediate threat. And so this smaller group wanted to take a long-term approach, which was to further develop computers. And incidentally, for one of those early years, Ivan Sutherland was actually the head of ARPA. But what was brilliant about what ARPA did was they funded smart students around the United States, and they had very little bureaucracy or oversight. They just believed that people were going to try to find and solve the problems. And they picked several different areas that they thought were important. Obviously, computer languages and architectures were important, but they believed that at some point, the processing power would be great enough that they'd produce a lot of data, and that we would probably need something graphical to see it. So this is rather an abstract notion to begin with. It's a faith that something big is coming, let's get started. And I think that was brilliant on their part. And Utah was picked as the place to focus on. At the same time, ARPA wanted their researchers to talk with each other. So the beginning of the ARPANET was not because they thought they were going to turn something into what became the internet. They just wanted people to talk to each other because everybody was using a different kind of computer, all of which were incompatible. So I arrived just after the very first generation had started on graphics and on the internet. And the first 4 nodes of ARPANET was Berkeley, UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, and Utah. So we were the first 4, but it was ARPANET. And it's one of those things where you do something as needed and you don't know where it's going to take off. And they weren't even conceiving of it at that time as to what it was going to turn into or how profound it was going to be.
I want to ask you some points of view on the two things that you already mentioned. One is ARPA being giving you all the freedom to do what the students wanted. Just find smart people and fund them, and good things will come out of it. Is that still active now, or are the funding agencies in US and the world over not believing in that anymore?
Well, there was a period of time in which ARPA funded that across the United States, and it was extremely productive. And then it weakened. This is just around the time that I graduated. They began to, the program weakened, but it continued. And then later they started doing it again at a high level. And of course, the one that's, I think, fairly famous from several years ago was the autonomous driving vehicles. And there was ARPA that was driving that. So ARPA actually regained strength, and they renamed themselves as DARPA. They put defense in front of the word. I like ARPA. I think ARPA sounds better as a term. But they became strong, but they've always been there, and they funded research out in various places. And even at Pixar, we had a contract once with them to do some work for them. And as I say, the one they always had was very low bureaucracy. Now, I'd reached a point where I was on committees evaluating whether or not NIH or the National Science Foundation should fund somebody. But ARPA always had the lowest bureaucracy. And I always thought that was the best. And the reason is that if someone's coming to graduate school, they want to make a difference. So if you're putting a whole bunch of restrictions on them, then you're slowing them down at this stage in their career. And people hate to waste money, so they want to look over people's shoulders. Well, from my point of view, that's stupid. You're slowing people down. You're far better off having low bureaucracy, let people move as fast as they can. And then you will find some people who don't do good work, or they might abuse it. That can happen, right? But the cost of that is far lower than the cost of putting in a lot of bureaucracy and trying to prevent problems from happening. I still believe that to this day.
I hope academic administrators and funding managers in India and all over the world are listening to you, watching this. In your work at New York Tech and later at ILM or Pixar, in the area of animation, you created Rise, RenderMan, all the other packages. Animation as an academic research area that universities pursue? What has been the content of, was it felt then? What was the contribution that from the academic point of view, your work at New York Tech or later in the companies created?
Well, when I graduated with my doctorate degree, I went to interview at jobs at different universities. And when I interviewed with them, I said that the state of the art is such that we can make images look better and better, and ultimately can make an animated film with them. Now, all those schools that I interviewed with thought that was about the dumbest thing they could imagine wasting money on. I couldn't get a job. So I ended up working for a small startup company that was doing computer-aided design. And I was just there for a little while when I got a call from the New York Institute of Technology, which at that time was a third-rate school, but they were willing to fund it. So I was hired to come in and start an R&D group for doing animation, because the president of the school wanted to do animation. He knew nothing about technology at all. He just thought computers are going to change things, so I'm going to fund it. So he hired me to come start this group down in New York. And while we were located on a campus, none of our employees came from the students. We weren't actually part of the school program. We were just paid for by the school, and everybody that we got were essentially these PhDs from all around the world trying to solve these problems. And one of the things that we did early on, I should say, when I left Utah, I loved that environment so much. It was so exciting that I wanted to replicate it. Now, I really couldn't replicate it because that wasn't the kind of school this was at. I was really just running a research group. I shouldn't say just, it was a research group, but that's not the same thing as an academic environment. But as a manager, as a brand new manager, never having managed before, I made some mistakes because I didn't know what I was doing as a manager, and I didn't even see myself as a manager. I was a researcher. So I was in charge, but I didn't want to do the work of managing. I wanted to do the research. And I had a lot of great ideas. So it took me a while to sort of figure out that managing was also really interesting. Now, I made a bunch of mistakes there, but I also did some things that were right. One of them was that we published everything that we did. Now, I'm not saying that every company or every school should do this, but I'm saying that for us, the decision was we're going to publish everything. And then we went to Lucasfilm. I kept the same policy. We published everything. And then at Pixar, we published everything. And then at Disney, we published everything. And even Steve Jobs, who's known for being secretive, he never challenged me or questioned why we're publishing everything, because there was a reason for it. My belief was that we were so far away from our goal that it was critical that we be completely engaged with our community.
So the use of technology in movies, there are two sides to it. One is the special effects or VFX that, ILM or companies like that still do. And then there is full animation, which, Pixar and DreamWorks, all of them did. So is that, in that era, that is maybe early 80s, did anyone dare to actually make a full movie on the computer using computer graphics, or is just still doing bits and special effects?
Well, first of all, the special effects in the industry was done with real models and very sophisticated optical systems. We were the research division as part of Lucasfilm. We were actually never part of ILM. And our group, which is the computer division, was responsible for coming up with computer graphics for special effects, for digital video, and for editing of digital audio. Now, at this time, the industry was not digital for audio. There was no digital video editing, and the effects were done by models and by film. And you had the beginnings of people starting to have fairly simple graphics for commercials. And there was one group, a secretive group, that was more advanced. They had a Cray computer, and they made a couple of pieces that were put into a film later. The first film that actually included some computer graphics was Future World, which incidentally was not a very good film. But what they included was that handpiece that I did for that class project was in Future World. And then a student of mine, and not student, a colleague of mine, another student, Fred Park, digitized his wife's face talking. So that was in the movie. So that's the first real computer graphics. And I'm the first person to work on research on motion blur with computer graphics. And this is back at New York Tech. I made several images trying to solve the problem. Motion blur is important because of a physiological problem with the way film is projected. Computer graphics images are in perfect focus. And when film is projected, most people don't know this. Of course, now we usually have digital projection, But at this time, all projection was film projection, and every frame was flashed on the screen twice. So if you're tracking something that's moving across the screen, then your eye is moving, but the image appears, a sharp edge appears the same place on the movie screen. So when your eye moves, that sharp edge appears in a separate place in the back of your eyeball. So you see a double image wherever there's a sharp edge moving across the screen. And the reason you don't see it with live action film is that when they photograph actors with cameras, they are blurred in the direction of motion. So there are no sharp edges for the eye to key on. So the perfection of computer graphics was actually a perceptual problem. So we had to solve this. So we had two different approaches. I was trying to come up with an analytic approach, and Rob and Lauren were trying a different approach. And then one of our engineers suggested something with some random sampling. So for most of this time, I was competing with Rob and Lauren because they took one approach and I took the other. It was not a fair competition because there were two of them, one of me, and I was also the boss, so I didn't have as much time. But it was awesome because we got together every week. We were trying to outdo each other. You just sort of felt, you know, we're progressing, we're making all these things happen. And then when this concept of the stochastic sampling came in, then suddenly that just blew past the approach that I had.
So tell us a little bit about Lexo Junior, how it was made and its impact.
Well, the first program, the first animation that was made using this software with the motion blur was Andre and Wally B. And then the second one was while we were in the process of spinning off as Pixar. So it was made just after we spun off as Pixar. And that was what was Lexo Junior. And for each of these films, we would try to pick something which was challenging to help us drive the technology forward. So the plan was make some short films. Then we wanted to make some commercials because we wanted to subject ourselves to the rigors of business pressure. Because we knew that that would be a different kind of thing. It's different than academic pressure, right? Where you're trying to get something ready to show at SIGGRAPH. But initially it was do some shorts, then do some commercials, then do a half-hour television special, then do a feature film. Now, in fact, what happened is by the time we got to the state where we could do a commercial, then Disney, who we'd had a software partnership with, they said, well, if you can do a half hour, you can do a feature film. So we just skipped the half hour one and went off to do Toy Story. So Toy Story was, we signed the contract to make it in 1991. It was a pretty important year. We signed the contract to make it. Beauty and the Beast came out, and we had written the graphics software for Beauty and the Beast, but they also used the 3D graphics for this ballroom dance that took place in Beauty and the Beast. And it was also the year that Terminator 2 came out. So When we split off as Pixar from Lucasfilm, then the technology that we used was also part of the deal that Lucasfilm could now use it. And then I helped them find 2 people to head up their brand new computer graphics group inside of ILM. So we had done some special effects for ILM, like in Star Trek, but we were a separate division. We just did it working in conjunction with them. So as we left, we started a new group. They could use the software, and then they got the contract to do something for the Abyss. And then more importantly, in 1991 is when Terminator 2 came out that had that silver robot. And so 91 was a very impactful year. For us, it was the start of making Toy Story, and it took us 4 years. So in 95, it came out. And when it came out, it then sort of shocked everybody. So DreamWorks, which is doing 2D animation at the time, bought a company for doing, they bought PDI to make Shrek, Blue Sky, which was owned by Fox, which now it's owned by Disney, but Blue Sky, and we were all friends with each other, but our success opened the door for the others because it proved that it was commercially viable. And so Toy Story essentially was like this step function in the industry.
I listened to Steve Jobs, who gave a talk at SIGGRAPH 95, and I was there, and he was talking about the fully computer generated Toy Story coming out in 1995, exactly 100 years after the first feature film or moving film by Lumiere brothers. And he was talking of this as a historical necessity, and as Steve is good at, he's really talking it up. So how was working with Steve Jobs, because he's a cult figure, everybody likes him, and he has had lasting impact on many things. What are your personal feelings or professional approach that he took to the kind of thing that you were involved with?
Well, when Steve was younger, he was pretty difficult to deal with. And when he acquired Pixar, that was who he was. That's like, I knew that's when Steve was like that. So, and he was in an odd state because he'd been kicked out of Apple. He was now starting this company, which was a Next Computer, and then struggling with that. The only other company he invested in was Pixar. He actually tried to buy Pixar before starting Next because he wanted to turn us into what Next became. And so we turned him down. He then formed Next, and then we ran into him later at SIGGRAPH in San Francisco and restarted the conversations. And this time, Steve bought Pixar under the terms that we were a computer graphics company. But what I found over the years was that Steve's story is really more like the classical hero's journey. So he was cast out of his kingdom for various problems, and he wandered around in the wilderness, struggling, making mistakes, and learning, making mistakes with Pixar, making mistakes with Next. But he was learning. Every time he made this mistake, he would consolidate it. And I watched Steve change a lot. And then he got married, had some kids, and Laureen had a remarkable influence. He got more humor in his life. He let Pixar have a very different culture. The culture at Pixar was not at all like Apple, or like Next, I mean. And he wasn't trying to make us be like that. He said, it's good to be unique and to be different. So around in the few years before Toy Story, Steve went through a fairly remarkable transition. And there are things he did which were just jaw-droppingly amazing. He's so incredibly smart. And after he went through that change, when he sort of figured these things out, the people that were with him stayed with him for the rest of his life.
The industry is going through a lot of changes and consolidation. DreamWorks filing for bankruptcy or getting acquired, Rhythm and Hughes. There's so much happening. What is the has this industry hit a plateau? Now you can do these things easier. You don't need a lot of creativity or innovation. No, what is the reason? Why is there so much turmoil? At least as I see it in the industry.
Well, if you look at from a technical point of view, the very best work, which is done at Disney and Pixar, they have two separate groups. We keep them pretty separate from each other. They communicate a lot, but they actually use different systems and different processes, which is something I believe in. The differences actually work to our advantage. If you look at special effects, let me stay away from animation companies for a minute. If you look at special effects, the ability to buy the software and the hardware is pretty easy. So there's a low barrier to entry to get the equipment. So what you need then are people who are trained to be able to make the artistic decisions. Because there are a lot of companies who can do it, and a lot of people coming out of schools who are trained to do it, the result is that the special effects companies are in a very low margin business. So it's a difficult business. So like the Rhythm and Hughes, who had a really good company, John Hughes was running it, and he had a group there in India. And had a great spirit about it. To me, I think they're a pretty fantastic company, but the margins were too low. It was so competitive that it was hard for them to sustain anything there.
So it's sad because many of my students worked in DreamWorks in Bangalore, and Rhythm and Hughes was, I sit in Hyderabad, my university is in Hyderabad, and Rhythm and Hughes is hardly a couple of miles away. And I have taken my graphics students to the Rhythm and Hughes studio to see how they do things about 10 years ago when they were still very active.
Yeah, so, that was a great group. I visited them incidentally.
So there are new art forms.
The group for DreamWorks there in Hyderabad also, that was a very good group.
Yes.
And they basically finished a movie after being notified that Universal was going to cut them off, when actually their best people were there in Hyderabad. But Universal didn't want to have this image of laying off American workers while still employing people in India.
So do you think there is scope for hybrid of VFX, special effects, and animation, now that there are many stop motion art forms like stop motion and big, very, very capable cameras, versatile cameras available? Is there a scope for combining the two and creating things that never been seen before?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. First of all, a lot of hybrid work is already being done in the live action films. But when I saw Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, that had a very different artistic look to it, which I thought was very successful. And they did a really good job with the story too. I thought they really pulled it off. So the trick with the technology is to understand that while we want things to look good, it's not about that. That the most important thing is that the story be good. And even if you think about Finding Nemo, what most people forget is if they go into the dentist's office and they see the humans look terrible. Nobody remembers that. It doesn't matter. I mean, now there's no way in the world that Pixar or Disney would ever think that they could let something out that looked as bad as those humans do. But you know something? It honestly did not matter in that movie.
What do you think of technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality? What is its potential for entertainment industry to be an alternate media that gives different experiences, etc. They have been, the ideas have been around for many years. They have not really reached a critical stage of adoption, if you ask me. What's your take on that?
Well, actually, there are a couple of things. One of them is very important. But the first I want to note is that AR and VR were implemented by Ivan Sutherland about 52 years ago. All right, so they've been around a long time, and people have been working on them. Some putting a lot of energy, like University of North Carolina has been working on it a long time, and and people have worked on storytelling or various things that they need to do to try to solve the problem. So they were, Henry Fuchs and others there were pushing the boundaries there, trying to make it happen. Then all of a sudden, a while ago, the buzz really hit, and that was when Oculus came out. Now, what most people didn't realize, that almost nobody realized, is that all that Oculus did was that it was fast enough that it got rid of the lag time. There was no other difference. So in terms of storytelling or anything else like that, all they had was that perceptual difference of lag time. It's important, it's our physiological perception of things. But all of a sudden people were saying, well, we're going to do all this, we're going to tell stories. Facebook and Google all got really caught up in funding money and all this because they started to follow down this hype trail without actually even including or talking with people who thought about storytelling. Now, to come back to the question about AR and VR, virtual reality is kind of a big field. You can think of it could be used for different kinds of things. If it comes to like storytelling, if the world is the character, it makes a lot of sense. Like if you want to go into the world of Star Wars or into the world of Harry Potter and his castle, if the world is the character and you want to explore it, it works well. But when it comes to telling a story, it's really not very good. I've only seen 2 or 3 good storytelling pieces. And the reason is that storytelling is a carefully crafted medium where you are directing where people are looking. So if you take a film which was, among the better of the films, I don't think it was wholly successful, but it was Pearl. I think it was the one where they're in a Volkswagen. And so you're in this virtual reality and you're sitting next to the driver and you're watching this story. But because you're in virtual reality, you're not sure where to look. And you can look out the window, you can see stuff out there. But the fact that you can look around and you don't know where to look actually gives a barrier between you and the story. It distances you. It doesn't actually pull you into it. It separates you from you. Now, they made a cut of the story to submit to the Academy Awards, which is now just a regular 2D one. So it's not virtual reality. It's just the director going through and making a cut of the story. The director's 2D cut of the VR was a better story than when you actually sat in there in that seat and watched it. And there's a reason for it. Now, that I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying, okay, they haven't figured it out yet, which is why you experiment and you try things. But you just don't naively say, oh, now we're in the world, we've got all these added advantages. Well, that isn't necessarily true, but there are a lot of places where it's very powerful to be in that world there, where you really want to be in there. And it is very important. So it's this broad range, and one has to think of this broad range of virtual reality, and storytelling is just one little really hard corner of it. Worth looking at from a point of view of research and for either companies or students or something like that. But it's still early stages. And augmented reality, obviously coming too. Some of it is I think the analogy for me is like when we were starting off, knowing we didn't have enough compute power. So honestly, I didn't worry a lot about the compute power. I worried about the algorithms and the other important things, knowing that it was going to come. And I feel like, oh, that's kind of where we are. You get augmented reality, virtual reality. There's really important things coming. There's still some physical things in terms of the way it fits on your head and the comfort and the perception and how it matches up with things like that. They'll solve those ultimately. So it's just, it's coming, but let's not pretend we're someplace where we aren't, because I've seen people do that in the past. They fool themselves. They waste a lot of money, then they fail. When in fact, the big vision may have been correct in the first place.
Thanks for sparing so much time. One last question I have is, you have now won the Turing Award along with Pat, and it's a great moment, recognition from the professional computing community, and we are all proud for this moment. But you've also been there at Academy Awards, several Academy Awards, Golden Globe Awards, and Grammy Awards, etc. How do you compare, the feeling that you get when you're in those venues or when you win those awards compared to the professional or technical community, computing community award like Turing Award?
Well, if I think about how I felt about different kinds of professional interactions, the Turing Award was actually the biggest surprise, that I never thought that was possible.
Computer graphics has evolved from simple line drawings to photorealistic 3D animation. Join us as we hear from computer graphics pioneers Ed Catmull and Pat Hanrahan, the 2019 ACM/AM Turing Award recipients. Ed Catmull founded the Computer Graphics Lab at New York Institute of Technology, the computer division of Lucasfilm, and Pixar Animation Studios. Pat Hanrahan is also a founding member of Pixar and developed rendering software for creating realistic computer graphics scenes.
Academy Awards, or the Oscars in general, they're voted on by members, but usually it's highly related to the quality of the film itself. On some of the awards, though, the Oscars are picked by colleagues, and when it's picked by colleagues, in both cases, whether it's in the entertainment industry or in the academic, is when it means the most, because it's the people who are expert in the area who are saying things. So they do mean a lot. But I'd have to say, just to be honest, that for all the feelings I've had, including premieres of films and looking at reviews and so forth, the thing that's always made me feel the best was when we sat down with the leaders at Pixar. We've got some problem, and the leaders in the room, and as we're working out the problem, and we don't have solutions, the people in that room own the problem. They're not looking at me and saying, what are you going to do about it? You're the leader. What are you going to do? It's like, what are we going to do? And when I walk out of those meetings and people are owning it and they're saying it's their problem also, I just felt, it may sound odd, but it actually made me feel better than anything else I've ever gotten in terms of awards or experiences in participating in award shows.
Thank you very much, Ed, for sparing so much time and having a delightful and insightful conversation on various topics. On behalf of the Indian computing community, ACM India, and me in personal, I thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure to talk with you. I know you've got some very smart students there, and and people there in the community in India. And I wish you all the very best, and I'm looking forward to talking with you again when the presentation is back.
So thank you once again. Stay safe, stay strong, and in these times. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.